Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. Today's story is inspired by Mike Fitzpatrick, a longtime subscriber and a contributor to Military Images. Mike wrote a profile of one of the United States Navy's most revered men to ever have worn the uniform, Robley Dunglison Evans. He's the man pictured here. Mike's profile of Evans will appear in our next issue. Evans, a Virginia born Naval Academy graduate in the class of 1864, went on to a long career during which he earned the nom de guerre Fighting Bob. Fighting Bob Evans's first combat at Fort Fisher in January 1865 almost cost him his life. One of the leaders of a forlorn hope, that's the juggernaut, the spearhead of an attacking force expected to take heavy casualties. He landed on the beach in front of the fort with his fellow Blue Jackets and Marines. In his 1901 memoirs, A Sailor's Log, Recollections of 40 Years of a Naval Life, Evans tells the story in vivid detail. We begin with the decision for a brigade of Navy and Marines to make that assault. Evans begins. It was agreed between the commanders that a naval brigade should be landed to assist the army in the assault by attacking the sea face of the fort, while the army went in on the northwest angle. Volunteers were called for from the Navy for this service, and it was gratifying to see the officers and men come forward almost in a body for a job they knew would be a desperate one. So many volunteered that finally a detail had to be made from each ship. And there were many sorely disappointed ones when the names were published. It was my good fortune to be the officer on deck when the order came on board directing the movement. And so I had my name put first on the list of those who volunteered. At the time, there were 4 classmates on board: Harris, Kellogg, Morris, and Evans. These are all members of the Naval Academy. All volunteered, and as only 2 could go, we agreed that Harris and Kellogg, being the first section of the class, should have one chance between them, and Morris and I, being in the second section, would have the second chance. Harris won his chance on the toss of a penny, but I, being a Virginian and having no particular family ties, insisted that I should go rather than Morris, who came from New York and would be sadly missed if he were killed. To all of this, Morris naturally objected, and we seemed a long way from any conclusion when he suggested that we leave the selection to Lieutenant Commander George Bach, who was to command the men from the Powhatan, that's their ship, which was done, and Bach selected me. January 13th found us again in front of Fort Fisher. This, of course, is the second time. They tried it in December, a month before. Didn't go so well. This time, Evans says, we came to stay. The fleet opened up on the fort and kept up a constant and accurate fire. We soon found a great difference in the garrison from the one we had fought in the first attack. They stood up and fought their guns most gallantly and would not be driven into the bomb-proofs. A division of gunboats was sent close in to cover the landing of the troops, which was done by the boats of the fleet in a sea heavy enough to make care necessary. I was in charge of the Commodore's barge, a very handsome, large, able boat, fit to carry 35 or 40 men. We made the first landing with over 200 boats, and the sight was a notable one as we pulled in, and occasional shells splashing among us and the bullets spluttering on the surface of the water. As the order was given to land, we went for the beach at full speed, and after passing the first breakers, turned our boats and backed them until our passengers could land almost with dry feet. But to get them out of the boats at the right moment was almost impossible. They would wait too long, and as a result, most of them were rolled up on the beach by the surf, soaking wet. But once on shore, it was glorious to see how they knew their business and the way they did it. As soon as they got their feet, they spread out in a skirmish line and the rifles began to crack. When I came in with the second line, those on shore had captured some cattle and were skinning them and did not seem the least bit worried by the fire of the skirmishers, only 300 or 400 yards distant. Before dark, we had all the men landed and enough ammunition and stores to make them safe and comfortable in case it should come on to blow. During the night, we completed the landing of stores and supplies and some 30-pound Parrott guns, which were immediately put in position, facing General Bragg, who was coming from the direction of Wilmington to reinforce the garrison of Fort Fisher. The bombardment was kept up during the 14th while the army got into position for the assault, which had been fixed for the afternoon of the 15th. January 15th proved a beautiful day for our work, clear and warm enough with a smooth beach for our landing. At early daylight, the whole fleet opened on the fort and poured shells on it at a fearful rate. After a hasty dinner at noon, the signal was made at 1 o'clock, land naval brigade. In a few minutes, we were off, cheered by our shipmates and pulling for the shore, where we landed unopposed and without serious accident, about 1.5 miles from the northeast angle of Fort Fisher. On the way ashore, some evilly disposed person fired a shot at us, which struck the stroke oar of my boat, cut it in two, and sent the handle spinning across my stomach with such force that I thought I was broken in two. On landing, we were quickly formed in 3 divisions with the Marine Battalion in the lead. During the forenoon, a force of firemen had landed under Lieutenant Preston to dig rifle pits well to the front, and these were to be occupied by the Marines, who were to keep down the rebel fire until the sailors, armed with cutlass and revolver, reached the parapet. When the divisions were formed, we advanced until we reached a point about 1,200 yards from the fort, where we halted and waited the signal to charge, which was to be the blowing of a steam whistle on the flagship, repeated by other vessels of the fleet. All the guns that we could see had been dismounted or disabled in the bombardment, but after we landed, there was one large rifle that opened on us and did some damage. The shells generally struck short of us and would then ricochet down the level beach, jumping along for all the world like rabbits. To avoid the shell fire, the divisions had been marched by the flank to take advantage of what shelter the slope of the beach offered. It thus happened that of the 3 divisions forged up abreast of each other, and we charged in this formation, 3 columns abreast, the Marines leading. While we were waiting for the army to report ready, our men had a good rest and seemed to be in excellent spirits. The rebels were firing at us slowly, but doing no damage to speak of. Curious little puffs of sand showing where the Enfield rifle balls were striking, but they only hit a man now and then by accident. At 3 o'clock, the order to charge was given, and we started for our long run of 1,200 yards over the loose sand. The fleet kept up a hot fire until we approached to within about 600 yards of the fort, and then they ceased firing. The rebels seemed to understand our signals, and almost before the last gun was fired, they manned the parapet and opened on us with 2,600 muskets. The army had not yet assaulted, so the whole garrison concentrated its fire on us. Under the shower of bullets, the Marines broke before reaching the rifle pits that had been dug for them and did not appear again as an organization in the assault. Most of the men and many of the officers mixed in with the column of sailors and went on with them. About 500 yards from the fort, the head of the column suddenly stopped, and, as if by magic, the whole mass of men went down like a row of falling bricks. In a second, every man was flat on his stomach. The officers called on the men, and they responded instantly, starting forward as fast as they could go. At about 300 yards, they again went down, this time under the effect of canister added to the rifle fire. Again, we rallied them and once more started to the front under a perfect hail of lead, with men dropping rapidly in every direction. We were now so close that we could hear the voices of the rebels, and what they said need not be written here. The officers were pulling their caps down over their eyes, for it was almost impossible to look at the deadly flashing blue line of parapet. And we all felt that in a few minutes more, we should get our cutlasses to work and make up for the fearful loss we had suffered. At this moment, I saw Colonel Lamb, the Confederate commander, gallantly standing out on the parapet and calling on his men to get up and shoot the Yankees. I considered him within range of a revolver, so took a deliberate shot at him. As I fired, a bullet ripped through the front of my coat, across my breast, turning me completely around. I felt a burning sensation like a hot iron over my heart, and I saw something red coming out of the hole in my coat, which I took for blood. I knew, of course, that if a bullet had gone through this portion of my body, I was done for, but that was no place to stop. So I went on at the head of my company. As we approached the remains of the stockade, I was aware that one particular sharpshooter was shooting at me. And when we were 100 yards away, he hit me in the left leg, about 3 inches below the knee. The force of the blow was so great that I landed on my face in the sand. I got a silk handkerchief out of my pocket and, with the kind assistance of my classmate, Hoban Sands, soon stopped the blood and again went to the front just as fast as I could. About this time, the men were stumbling over wires, which they cut with their knives. They proved to be wires to the torpedoes over which we had charged, but they failed to explode. My left leg seemed to sleep, but I was able to use it. The stockade, or what remained of it, was very near, and I determined to lead my company by the flank through a break in it, and then charge over the angle of the fort, which now looked very difficult to climb. I managed to get through the stockade with 7 others when my sharpshooter friend sent a bullet through my right knee, and I realized that my chance of going, well, it was settled. I tried to stand up, but it was no use. My legs would not hold me, and besides this, I was bleeding dreadfully, and I knew that it was a matter which had to be looked at. I heard someone say, "They're retreating." And looking back, I saw our men breaking from the rear of the columns and retreating. All the officers, in their anxiety to be the first into the fort, had advanced to the heads of the columns, leaving no one to stay the men behind. And it was in this way we were defeated by the men breaking from the rear. 2 minutes more, and we should have been on the parapet, and then nobody can even guess what would have happened. But surely a dreadful loss of life. As the men retreated down the beach, they were gathered up and put into trenches to oppose Bragg, and there served until after the fort was captured. Of the 8 of us who went inside the stockade, all were shot down. One, the color bearer of my company, was halfway up the parapet when he received his death wound. When I received the wound in my right knee, I began at once to try to stop the flow of blood. I used for the purpose one of the half-dozen silk handkerchiefs with which I had provided myself, but I was so tired and weak from loss of blood that I was some time doing the trick. In the meantime, my sharpshooter friend, about 35 yards away, continued to shoot at me, at the same time addressing me in very forcible but uncomplimentary language. At the 5th shot, I think it was, he hit me again, taking off the end of one of my toes, tearing off the sole of my shoe, and wrenching my ankle dreadfully. I thought the bullet had gone through my ankle. The pain was so intense. For some reason, I don't know why, this shot made me unreasonably angry, and rolling over in the sand so as to face my antagonist, I addressed a few brief remarks to him. And then, just as someone handed him a freshly loaded musket, I fired, aiming at his breast. I knew all the time that I should kill him if I shot him, but had not intended to do so until he shot me in the toe. My bullets went a little high, striking the poor chap in the throat and passing out the back of his neck. He staggered around after dropping his gun and finally pitched over the parapet and rolled down near me, where he lay dead. I could see his feet as they projected over a pile of sand, and from their position knew that he had fought his last fight. Near me was lying the coxswain of my boat, Campbell by name, who had a canister ball through his lungs and was evidently bleeding to death. When he saw the result of my shot, he said, "Mr. Evans, let me crawl over and give that another shot." He was dead almost before I could tell him that the poor fellow did not require any further attention from us. One of the Marines from the Powhatan, a splendid fellow named Wasmuth, came through the stockade, quickly gathered me up under one arm, and before the sharpshooters could hit him, laid me down in a place of comparative safety. But a moment afterward, the fleet opened up fire again, and the shells from the new Ironsides and the monitors began falling dangerously near us. Occasionally, one would strike short and exploding, sent great chunks of mud and pieces of log flying in all directions. Wasmuth again picked me up, and after carrying me about 50 yards, dropped me into a pit made by a large shell. Here I was entirely protected from the rebel fire, and several times called to him to take cover, but he said each time, "The bullet has not been made that will kill me." I was very drowsy and almost asleep when I heard the peculiar thug of a bullet, and looking up, found poor Wasmuth with his hand to his neck, turning round and round, the blood spurting out in a steady stream. The bullet had gone through his neck, cutting the jugular, and in a few minutes he dropped in the edge of the surf and bled to death. He certainly was an honor to his uniform. Just as our men began to break, the army made their charge and were able to make the lodgment on the northwest portion of the works before the rebels, who had taken us for the main assaulting column, saw them. When they discovered them, however, they went at them with a savage yell, and for 7 hours fought them desperately, the same bomb-proof in several cases being captured and recaptured 5 or even 6 times. A number of sharpshooters remained on the sea face and northeast angle and shot at every moving thing. No doubt this was owing to the fact that quite a number of Marines were scattered about the beach, wherever they could find cover, keeping up a steady fire. So we'll end Evans's account here. You students of the Civil War know well that the battle ended in victory for the men in blue, placing the last major Confederate port in Confederate hands. Less than 3 months later, General Robert E. Lee surrendered the Army of Northern Virginia, effectively ending the war. And what of Evans? He went on to a brilliant career, ending his service as a rear admiral during Theodore Roosevelt's second administration and dying in 1912, mourned as a national hero. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.